Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival. I'm Nick Gillespie, guest moderator for Open to Debate, the nation's only nonpartisan debate organization. Usually we run Oxford-style debates, but instead we're going to have a debatee conversation today about something making headlines that's important to all of us, free speech. Specifically, free speech in the age of the second Trump presidency. The Trump administration has threatened social media companies, sued news networks, universities, and placed restrictions on press access to White House events. Trust in the media has hit historic lows, and as a libertarian journalist for Reason Magazine, I take part of the blame for that. I've also got my own takes on everything we're talking about, but my job today is to moderate today's speakers on these topics. Please help me in welcoming our speakers, Brandy Cruz and Nadine Strossen. Brandy Cruz is an Emmy award-winning journalist and political commentator who now hosts her independent show, Undivided. She frequently takes on the Fourth Estate on her program. And then Nadine Strossen, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. She was named one of America's 100 most influential lawyers by National Law Journal. She was national president of the American Civil Liberties Union, and she is the author of, among other books, Hate, Why We Should Resist It with Free Speech, and Free Speech, What Everyone Needs to Know. Okay. All right, so let's get this going by Brandy. I'll go to you first. Give me, the overview. Is Donald Trump 2.0 good for free speech?
Donald Trump is a god among men. He's never done anything wrong. I'm going to praise him effusive, and I'm sure everyone in this crowd loves him. Donald Trump is better than Biden on free speech. Actually, as much as I'm totally out of my league with Nadine, it's an honor to be on stage with her. I'm very confident in that argument. I don't think there's any comparison. I think the era of the pandemic was the single most dangerous period for free speech in modern history in the United States of America. I'll defend that all day long. I don't think Trump is perfect on free speech. I think there's some things that we'll agree with that he's done that are problematic.
Okay. Nadine, is Trump good for free speech or not?
Absolutely not. And I agree with Brandy that Biden was terrible on many free speech issues. And actually, that's been true for every president in my lifetime. He is in a category unto himself.
Very quickly,
in terms of the breadth
why?
and depth of his attacks, using every possible instrument, from not only the jawboning that was Biden's main approach, but also civil lawsuits, invoking the power of every single executive agency, something like 20 different agencies, bringing defamation lawsuits, going after the institutions in civil society that traditionally have been mainstays in supporting free speech.
Okay, let's talk about Harvard and anti-Semitism at Harvard. Trump has gone hard after that. Is it good that the president is going to Harvard and saying you have to do these things this way or you lose your federal funding?
Well, I think to a certain extent. I'm not going to agree with everything he's done on all of the college campuses. We've had some experiences here at the University of Washington that I think, honestly, a heavier hand could have been used. But that issue is...
What do you mean by a heavier hand?
A heavier hand, well, certainly not by the president, but a heavier hand by the University of Washington officials. I think that their protection of free speech, what they call free speech, was actually protection of people who were there committing acts of violence and vandalism and making Jewish students feel unsafe. I think there's a big bright line between free speech and free Palestine and actual acts of intimidation and violence that make campus environments unsafe. When it comes to Donald Trump, what's happened on Harvard and what he's talked about with Chinese students, I disagree with that. I think it's too heavy-handed. But at the same time, these universities are allowing their campuses to become these breeding grounds for people who are violent activists, who are sowing division on campuses, who are making certain segments of the campus population and
so
students
Trump
feel
coming
unsafe.
in, if I may, then Trump coming in and saying this has to stop, that's a positive for free speech?
I think some aspects of it, yes.
Nadine, over the years, you've been critical of places like Harvard for the way that they suppress speech. Is going after anti-Semitism on campuses at places like Harvard, is that good for the president to be doing that?
Well, you know, to use an old cliche, two wrongs don't make a right, and there's absolutely no doubt that universities have been overripe for reform that free speech organizations and advocates have been calling for, but that does not warrant the United States president coming in with all the enormous coercive power of the federal government and demanding that the university change every single aspect of its structure, from how it admits students, whom it admits, how it hires, what its curriculum is. That is the antithesis of academic freedom.
Does it matter if it's a state school, a state-supported school versus a private school, or not?
Well, it matters in the sense that private universities have no obligation themselves to respect free speech under the Constitution, although most of them bind themselves voluntarily to do that. But in any case, we're talking about the United States government imposing restrictions on what can be said, what can be taught, what cannot be taught. That violates the First Amendment, whether it's done toward private institutions or public universities.
And if I can just disagree a little bit, it's that sort of two wrongs don't make a right. And one of the big reasons that I wanted to be here—
Three wrongs? We're talking a totally different game.
100% produce a right. One of the big reasons I wanted to be here in front of this particular crowd—
it's a good-looking crowd, by the way.
Good-looking crowd,
Beautiful
yes.
crowd. They
But
smell nice, too.
a group of people that probably I don't reach as much with my content is the hypocrisy angle of it. The left is dripping with hypocrisy over the free speech issue. Not Nadine, because of course she's perfect and she's been pretty morally consistent on this for a very long time. But if this were right-wing neo-Nazi extremists or students marching through the quad of Harvard or the University of Washington, I don't believe the left would be up in arms if a Democratic president came in and said, we're going to do X, Y, Z unless you take action here. So I think when it's an attack on free speech that threatens their ideas, done by a politician who they disagree with politically, I feel like the left is far more eager to condemn it and to seek action against it.
Unfortunately, in my lifetime, I've seen hypocrisy constantly. Those of us who defend free speech say that for most people, they defend freedom of speech. For me, but not for thee. Yeah. And I find it absolutely mystifying to do debates in front of conservative and even some libertarian audiences who are cheering on the most intrusive federal government regulation of private institutions. Isn't that antithetical to traditional conservative principles?
Do you feel like, thank you, do you feel like in Trump, in the second Trump administration, has the heckler's veto been undercut a little bit? Because you certainly wrote about this in Fire and whatnot, where 10 years ago, there was a rash of speakers being invited to campuses who were not able to speak because there was protests, and then the university would say, well, you have to provide your own security, et cetera. A lot of people were deplatformed. Is Trump changing that equation at all in a way that might make him better for free speech?
It's too hard to know, Nick. Last year, we certainly saw a record number of deplatformings, according to Fire's surveys. And unfortunately, I'm still seeing reports of cancellations from the left happening on college campuses. Sadly, perhaps as an overreaction to Trump's intimidation. So let me give you an example from right around the corner where I live in New York, Columbia University. Which of course sort of acceded to demands from the Trump administration. And last week there was a report that Columbia has got an office with some Orwellian name, Office for Institutional Equity. It sounds pretty good, right? Called in a Catholic student who on his social media platforms was questioning transgender, progressive orthodoxy on transgender issues. And this office called him in to investigate him. Now, that's the sort of thing that I think would not please Donald Trump's politics, and yet I suspect that this office felt that they're under pressure from the Trump administration to protect against discriminatory harassment, because it's specifically focusing on anti-Semitism, but they have to get beyond anti-Semitism.
Brandy, let me ask you, one of the first things Trump did was issue an executive order banning DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, in the federal government in places getting federal money. Is that a win for free speech?
I don't think it has anything to do with free speech. Okay. DEI is a racist policy. DEI is rooted in racism. It is the antithesis of what this country was supposed to move toward after the civil rights era. DEI has to do with civil rights, federal laws, and no preferential hiring based on immutable characteristics. So I don't see an intersection there with the free speech argument. Okay. Now you could say, you could say, oh, well, you know, what about a private company that wants to engage in DEI, like a Target or a Costco, to use a Northwest reference. But at the same time, a Costco can't hire someone openly based on skin color or give them preferential treatment. They're still violating federal law. So DEI, to me, I don't see any nexus to free speech.
Well, do you agree with that? Or because
Not at
part
all.
of
The problem with the anti-DEI executive orders is that they are so sweeping and so vague and so overbroad, and explicitly target discussion and ideas, not simply discriminatory conduct. And so what we see is universities and other institutions, understandably because of the threat of penalty from the government, bending over backwards and eliminating whole words, phrases, courses, library books. We have U.S. military libraries all over the world having removed hundreds of books that refer to race or gender issues.
That's emanating from Trump's
executive. Because these orders are so overly broad and so vague.
Let me put you on the defensive a little bit, Nadine, regarding Trump and these kinds of dictates. Harvard, to use Harvard as an example, they recently shifted to a policy of institutional neutrality. They lost the Supreme Court case where it turned out that they had been discriminating against Asian students and whatnot. Would they be moving as fast as they are to kind of at least say that they're open for free speech absent Donald Trump winning? If Kamala Harris had won, would they be like, we've done enough?
It's hard to speculate on what might have happened. I will agree that I share a lot of the goals that are asserted by Donald Trump et al. In terms of free speech, promoting viewpoint neutrality and non-discrimination and fighting against anti-Semitism. But, the method is so totalitarian and so frightening that it is a method that could be used to impose exactly opposite goals. So that's why those of us who fight for civil liberties are often fighting for what seem to be rather abstract principles, such as neutral, rule of law, due process. And the violation of that I find really scary. One of my colleagues, I think, put it very well when he said, some of us love universities and are urging them to reform. Others hate universities and are seeking to destroy them.
And you would say Trump is in that latter
I think
camp.
so, yes.
Brandy?
Just to clarify, so on the question on the DEI question, I think it's a good clarification to say my answer to DEI has to do with what I believe DEI actually is. Yeah. So there are a couple of the things that you mentioned there that I agree with. For instance, the birthing people. Do I think that's stupid? Yes. Do I think it's something that the Trump administration...
You mean the term birthing people rather than
instead
say
of
women.
A woman,
yeah.
right? Do I think it's stupid? Yes. Do I think it's something the Trump administration needs to go to a university and meddle in and make them remove? No, I don't.
Okay. Let's talk about the media, the legacy media. Brandy, if there's an institution that has a lower approval rating than Congress, it's legacy media. Is the legacy media broken and unfixable?
Irreparably. So I came from legacy media. I spent 10 years at the Fox affiliate in Seattle. Before that, I was at the CBS radio affiliate in Seattle. And I wanted to do that job. I mean, that's what I wanted to do since 6th grade. So I had a real soft spot for the job I was in, and during the pandemic, I started to realize how badly it was failing. I mean, if there were ever a time in American history, feel how you want about what the government was putting down and the dictates, but if there were ever a time in American history where the media had an obligation to ask hard questions, I think that was the period of time every level of government was exerting such a profound amount of influence over people's lives and livelihoods. Yet I saw so many of my colleagues just accept it.
In Trump's second term, among other things, he sued 60 Minutes over what he claimed was a poorly edited interview with Kamala Harris. He refused to interview with 60 Minutes. Is that kind of intervention, is that good for free speech, to have the president say, it hurt my feelings, I had distress, even though I won the election, give me now $20 million?
Yeah, I mean, he's a sensitive guy. I can acknowledge that, right? So I think that this is an overreaction from Donald Trump. However, it was much more complex than that, though, because one of Kamala Harris's chief failings as a candidate and as a politician is her inability to string a sentence together cohesively. And what 60 Minutes did, you laugh, but it's true, it's a common practice. We edit interviews all the time. Yeah. But the way that they did it made her chief shortcoming look like it didn't exist.
That's the First Amendment.
Wait, no, what I'm saying is I think he shouldn't, I don't think he had to sue over it. Complain about it, whatever it is. And I'm sure we'll get into the FCC and the distortion doctrine and all of that stuff. But I think it's enough to just try to point it out. I think the frustration with conservatives.
But does it move free speech forward, or is it just you bring a knife, I bring a gun?
I think the media has lost its desire to exercise free speech.
Brandy, you were talking about hypocrisy. I mean, this is the ultimate hypocrisy. For Trump to have complained, and I've supported the complaint, that the Biden administration was putting too much pressure behind the scenes on social media company to say certain things and not to say certain things. But the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself, plus his FCC and FTC and other agencies, are front and center explicitly using every possible legal tool, government regulation, civil lawsuits.
Let me ask you this, though, Nadine. Would you rather have a president, and again, we're both going to agree that both of these things are bad, but it shocks me that you actually think the Biden administration was better on free speech.
No, I said somewhat less bad.
Somewhat less bad. Just as an example, may I? As an example, the Hunter Biden laptop story, cue the size, whatever it is. The Hunter Biden laptop story, that was so suppressed at the urging of the Biden administration that you couldn't even share a link to it via a DM on X to your friends.
That's terrible, but look what Trump is doing. He's trying to silence every media outlet, social media as well as the traditional legacy media, not only by the direct lawsuits and the direct agency threats, but also by intimidating all of the other media.
Let me make my point. Would you rather have a president who silences a story to the point that it doesn't even get out to the American populace? Or is it worse to have a president who sues about a story that did get out after the fact?
Yes, but they're having exactly the same
they're both bad.
Chilling effect.
Okay.
Can I, just to follow up and keep you on the hot seat a little bit, Nadine, Joe Biden signed a law that was passed by Congress saying to the company that owns TikTok, you have to sell that. Biden signs off on saying, here is a company, a social media platform, and you have to divest.
I thought that law was terrible. It was supported broadly across the political spectrum. I think there's so I like the end result that Trump is not letting the law go into effect. But again, the method by which he is doing that, by ignoring a duly passed congressional statute that was signed by the President of the United States, just ignoring it, that is so dangerous to the rule of law and creating a precedent that can be used to silence speech.
And let me push a little bit on that. The Federal Trade Commission, the head of it is Andrew Ferguson, and he has opened up comments on potentially illegal content moderation policies on social media. How, and you can say, what, Joe Biden was terrible, and Joe Biden pushed to have the Hunter laptop Hunter Biden laptop story gets suppressed and all of that, and that's all true.
Yeah.
But how is it good for free speech if the FTC, which has really nothing to do with free speech, is starting to suggest to social media companies, like, that's a great platform you have here, but you're not doing the things I want you to be doing?
I don't think it's good. I don't agree with that. I don't think it's good. I think one of the things you said, potentially, you used the word potentially.
Potentially
and you talked
illegal.
about the chilling effect.
Yeah.
And those are two things that I think are important when we look at this, and I hope you'll consider this in earnest despite your feelings about Donald Trump. You're saying that Donald Trump's targeted lawsuit at Paramount.
That's just one example.
Right, no, I know.
Many.
And
one
also
example,
ABC, which settled, right?
Yeah, the accusation that he's, it's having a chilling effect across the board. So it's this idea that because of a couple actions, he's chilling people's free speech, like they're not brave enough to continue on with their free speech. Whereas you have Biden, who didn't just chill it, he squashed it. So one is a direct result of a president squashing free speech directly before it can even exist. And the other one, which again is bad, but the idea that it's worse to scare the media outlets so they feel like, oh, I can't print this because he might sue us. I don't even see a comparison.
Well,
I don't see two things on the same
Brandy,
plane.
I don't cede that point to you, but it is only one of many instruments that Donald Trump has used, including something like a couple of dozen executive orders that are directly coercing speakers and institutions and silencing them, which has resulted in many, many rulings by federal court judges, some of whom were appointed by Donald Trump himself. So we can't talk about, just woke Obama judges, quote
to
unquote.
tie it back to a question about the legacy media, and we'll all have vaguely or somewhat different definitions of that. Is there anything that the legacy media can do to, bump its approval ratings up into the high single digits? Or what might they do, Brad?
Yeah, look, in its current form, I think it's irreparably broken. And I'll give an example of the very panel that we're having right now. And I'm so grateful that I've even been critical of Cascade PBS, and they invited me here, and I think that's very admirable because they want an actual dissenting opinion. The absence of a similar panel during what I think was the worst period of free speech in our country about, is Biden bad for free speech, never would have existed. They never would have done it.
Right.
But now it's Trump, and it's like, well, now is Trump bad? And now I've got to sit here and we've got to talk about how bad Trump is, and we want to move past, leapfrog over the 4 worst years for free speech, I think, certainly in my lifetime. And I think it's a common tactic of the left. Let me just quickly make my point on this. January 6th, right? Horrible, embarrassing, awful. But that happened after 7 months of deadlier rioting, more widespread rioting, looting, murders, all of those things. And if you're debating January 6th, don't dare bring up the summer of 2020 because they'll be like, bring it back to here. So I think it's the same thing with Trump.
So
we want to leapfrog over Biden.
No, but I don't want to leapfrog over anything.
Nadine.
No, but all I'm saying, so there's really nothing the legacy media can do. Yeah. Can I bring it to you, Nadine? Because you have more faith, or I think you believe that older legacy institutions have some value, and that it would be good if we kind of revive them.
Well,
is there anything that the legacy media can do?
Well, I do think that media in general are incredibly important, singled out in the First Amendment itself, which expressly protects not only freedom of speech, but also freedom of the press. And the word, the fourth estate, is often used to refer to the media in addition to the 3 branches of government, which check and balance each other, that the fourth estate has a really essential role in our democracy to be the watchdog, especially when the other branches of government are falling down on the
we
job.
all agree with that. Is there one thing that legacy media, like should CBS or ABC, should they settle with Trump, or should they give him the middle finger and say, you know what, we're delivering the news the way we see it?
I wish that institutions, including the media, including universities, would resist, would exercise First Amendment rights. despite the clear risk. But I also think that capitulating to Trump is more than risky. It's a proven danger.
Yeah.
Colombia tried that, and obviously it failed.
That's a question like you think you capitulate, you buy off the mob, you buy off Donald Trump, and then they come back and take a little bit more.
Exactly. You just incentivize the bully to come back for more.
And to answer your question, I didn't. I got onto a rant about, January 6th. Introspection. I think that the media still, like the Hunter Biden laptop story, the New York Times moved on once it was proven to be true and just acted like all along they had reported on it as truth, and they never really apologized to their readers or the American people. But I think a little more contrition from the media about, hey, we got this wrong on COVID, we were wrong about this, we were wrong about this, would go a long way.
Let's continue talking not about media per se or legacy media per se, but is it time to overturn the New York Times v. Sullivan standard, which is a mid-60s court decision, a Supreme Court decision that said it made it very hard to sue for public figures, particularly politicians, to sue media organizations for negative stories about them. Let's start with you, Nadine. There's been a lot of talk about that, and Donald Trump the first time around said, I want to open up the libel laws. He is clearly an aficionado, saying, you know what, New York Times v. Sullivan, which insists on an absence of malice standard, it makes it impossible for public figures and public elected officials to get due process in the media. Is it good to overturn that or not?
I find it very ironic that Donald Trump has that position because he himself engages in so many defamatory comments and is so benefited by a rule that I think is clearly correct, that we want to avoid chilling discussion, robust, vigorous, critical discussion of government policies and government officials for fear that you might be found guilty or liable in damages for libel. This was a strategy that was used by Southern officials that were involved in this case, deliberately going after civil rights leaders and the national media that was covering the civil rights movement, saddling them with massive punitive damages that were aiming to literally shut down the movement and the national media coverage. In New York Times versus Sullivan itself, it was something like $500,000 in damages, and that was just one of many, many, many lawsuits around the country. So I completely agree with the Supreme Court that far better to have a few false statements go unremedied than to deter a whole lot of true
Brandy,
statements.
how do you feel about that?
It's a tough thing for me to hear. I get it.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing to say a few. I mean, one thing could ruin someone's whole life, and so that's tough. I'll agree with you that Donald Trump has a very tenuous relationship with the truth as well, so it is a little rich coming from him. Still voted for him, but I see that side of it.
Will you vote for him a fourth time?
No, not a third.
No.
Or
Okay.
I only voted for him once. I voted for
Yeah.
Clinton, Joe Jorgensen, who you'll love. So I'm only a first-time Trump voter. And no, I won't vote for him again. But I struggle with this because there's a lot of room between a good faith error and malice, right? That malice standard is so high. It's like, I think there ought to be some standard that's like gross incompetence. Didn't try at all to get the story correct.
But that actually is the standard. If I can put on my con law professor.
Please do.
Yeah, because the legal term is malice, but it's not used the way we use that term in everyday speech. It means intentional or reckless. And I take the gross. So that's, if you show recklessness, you can recover damages.
Can I ask Brandy to put you on the hot spot a little bit about that, especially as an independent podcaster? I mean, one of the things, and I suspect all of us on this panel, I hope everybody in the audience does too, what is great about the current moment is that we all own a printing press, right? We can all get our messages out to greater or lesser degrees. That's good.
For better or worse.
But you as a independent podcaster, you would be in the crosshairs of anybody in the Seattle City Council or the commentariat or whatever they have in Seattle. Don't you benefit from a high level of legal onus on the part of somebody coming after you?
In 15 years doing this job, I have never made an error that would have fit in the context of New York Times v. Sullivan that allowed me to be sued over it. So I want to state that, and in times where I have made an error, because I'm not perfect, I've immediately issued an apology. I do understand what you're saying, but at the same time, I think what it gives me, what it gives the business we're building, is the motivation that we need to make sure that we're doing our due diligence. And you're going to make errors. Everybody in the media makes errors. Yeah. But what I'm saying here is you have things like Nick Sandman, who was the young man who, there was a little piece of video and it looked like he was taunting these Native American elders.
Right, and this was the kid at the on the National Mall from Covington Catholic who was pilloried throughout the media for being...
Yeah, because it looked like he was taunting these Native Americans, but it was just a clip and it was shared widespread, and he actually did get a bunch of money.
So
they settled in that.
Is that an argument that the standards are okay? Because he did get a settlement.
Well, they settled. Now, I don't know if it had gone to trial, whether he would have succeeded on the merits, because I don't know if that was in bad faith or not. Because, I mean, I even shared the Nick Sandman video and thought, look at this punk kid. And I think I tried to operate, and I immediately took it down. And so I don't know if it had gone to trial, though, how that would have turned out, how it actually, the ruling would have been on that. So I understand what you're saying about one lawsuit for doing something wrong would put me under. But if that one thing I did wrong ruined someone's life irreparably, do I not deserve it?
Well, there are other mechanisms, such as the apology, such as the correction.
Right, you can correct and apologize.
And I've heard, and I think I've heard you say this, Brandy, as I've heard other responsible journalists say, even with trying to be as careful as we can, we sometimes make mistakes. So if you have a negligence standard, you may be found culpable, and so that's going to deter you from getting the information out quickly, getting the analysis out quickly.
Let's talk about a question that will hit home to Cascade PBS and to public radio and whatnot. Donald Trump has delivered, at least ostensibly delivered, on a longstanding promise among conservatives, libertarians, some leftists, saying that the government should not be, the federal government should not be supporting media institutions like PBS, like NPR. Nadine, is that a win for free speech or a loss for free speech to withdraw funding from PBS, NPR?
Well, the devil is in the details. It depends on what the reason is. So no entity has the right to government funding in the first place.
I do.
But once...
but my appeals so far have been remarkably unsuccessful. I don't even get tax rebates. But.
Once government has decided that it is going to provide the funding, it may not withdraw that funding in order to penalize certain viewpoints with which it disagrees. And when the corporation... When the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was set up, it was set up very carefully with all kinds of statutory insulations against punishment by government officials for disagreement with a viewpoint. Donald Trump has not been subtle at all. He has expressly said that he's withdrawing the money because of the biased and other negative adjectives that he uses for the coverage of these outlets. And therefore, that is violative of what the Supreme Court has called the bedrock free speech principle, that government must remain neutral with respect to ideas and views.
Yeah, on her legal analysis front, I mean, it's hard to disagree with that, right? If you've got the rationale in place that you have to meet in order to withdraw those funds, and he has been very vocal about why, but I'm very much in agreement that no entity that's primary purpose is news and information should want a dime of money from the government. Shouldn't want to take money from the entity that it's supposed to be holding accountable. I think it looks bad. I think it is bad.
Don't you have parents?
My parents were very poor. My dad died homeless, so I wasn't getting a lot of money from them. But I don't believe that the government should be, they're trying tax breaks in our state for media outlets, which to me, it's sink or swim. If you're producing a product, there's a bunch of people who paid to be here. Cascade gets just a small portion of its funding from the federal government. Immediately after this happened, they put out a fundraising call. I'm sure they were able to raise enough to fill the gap. I don't think they should want it, and I don't think they should fight to keep it.
Okay.
Well, to me, it's a little bit like public libraries. Would you oppose government funding for libraries or schools?
If you're going to get into it. I mean, the thing is, though, that those public libraries exist if they're fully funded by the government, right? This isn't a mix of public-private, and this isn't the dissemination via the free press of information. Public libraries don't exist to hold the government accountable. They're just books on a shelf. the media exists to hold the government accountable,
Well,
but it's taking money from the government, totally contrary to what its function is supposed to be.
You know, it's so interesting because the founders who wrote the First Amendment, ratified the First Amendment, really believed that an informed public was essential to democracy, right? We, the people, to effectively wield
But
sovereign
does that,
power.
I mean, you know, if you know, simultaneously public broadcasting gets very little money, they always talk about how it's just a couple, the equivalent of a couple of stamps a year for people to support it. But if we don't get that, we'll go out of business. I mean, do you really, is it true to say if Trump succeeds in pulling funding that the media writ large landscape will be depleted by that?
Well, again, I'm so concerned about the overall ripple effects, but let me say this, from the very complex public-private structure and the national plus the all of the affiliate stations, I know that for a lot of the affiliate stations, including a couple of the Colorado ones that are participating in the challenge to the Trump executive order, really are like the only source of information and culture and even life-saving emergency type information for those communities. There is no alternative. And so I think that it really is essential, the way I feel that having public libraries and museums, all of which are government funding, it's not really a luxury. It's investing in making sure that we, the people, consist of every single person in this country, including those who are not wealthy enough to buy their own books.
I just think it never should have been there in the first place. It's not going to fundamentally change the ability of people to access information. We have the internet. I mean, I don't think a ton of people are watching
But this is
PBS.
talking about...
Do you think then that should the federal government divest from the Kennedy Center as well?
Well, so I'm talking specifically about my opposition to them getting money is they're supposed to be covering the president. They're supposed to be covering the government. So the example of the library, to me, it's not even, I don't understand the comparison. So for people whose job it is to be the fourth estate and to stand in the breach and be the voice of the people when it comes to covering government, to take funds from them is unbelievably strange to me. So I don't see the comparison with the Kennedy Center.
Okay. We're going to go to our audience question. We have a question from Anonymous. Thank you, whoever you are. And the question is, should teachers face consequences for lawful off-duty expressions of free speech? Where's the line between professional standards and personal freedom? Nadine, why don't we start with you on that? And also think about that in the context of Trump. Are people more or less likely to be held accountable for?
I think you do, well, more importantly, the United States Supreme Court said in an ACLU case back in 1969, neither teachers nor students shed their freedom of speech at the schoolhouse gate. And as part of that, you do not give up your free speech rights as a citizen by virtue of being a government employee, whether it be a teacher or a firefighter or a police officer. So yes, while you are performing your professional duties in the classroom, you will be subject to certain restrictions that hold you to professional standards, but you do not forfeit your ordinary rights to express your opinions. And when you are off duty, and that includes on social media. Unfortunately, we've seen many instances from the left and from the right, depending on the local politics, of pressure resulting in firing of teachers and other public employees because of what should be protected free speech.
Do you think is that amped up under Trump, or is it kind of a steady
state?
I
would say it's a steady state, but maybe the valence has shifted in terms of which particular perspectives are going to be seen as unpopular.
Brandy, what do you think?
There's an example just this week of this. And look, anytime you have a human being deciding whether speech has gone too far, you know, it's always their bias that's going to factor into it, right? And where's the line and who gets to decide? So I understand, but there was a teacher in Olympia, Washington, this past week who was going to run in a marathon, and on his personal Instagram, he posted a picture of himself with a sign that said, "This teacher kills fascists." So fascists, great. Who doesn't want to kill fascists? Fine. But the problem is his previous tweets had made it clear that he thinks MAGA Trump supporters are fascists. So it's not a big leap to say this teacher, and he said he's going to wear the sign during his marathon, says this teacher kills fascists. So okay, if you're a conservative and you're sending your kid to that teacher's class and that teacher is going to says he kills, and I get it, it's a reference from a guitar or whatever, says he's going to kill Trump supporters, is that not concerning and problematic? And where do you draw that line? And the school district basically said, you know, we're not in the practice of monitoring their personal social media, which I do get because it's a slippery slope. But if I were a parent, would I be freaked out about it and want to go to the school and ask what they're going to do about it, or are you going to talk to him? I would. I think there are things when you're tasked with the education of other people's children, I think there are things you can say on your personal social media that rise to a level where the safety of those children comes into play. And if I were a conservative Trump-supporting parent with a child going to his classroom, when he says what he says about MAGA fascist Trump supporters, now I'm not saying he should lose his job, but I am saying it's incredibly concerning and it's not something the school should just ignore.
Okay, another question, again from Anonymous, quite prolific.
Yes.
Does a right to free speech include allowance to spread mis and disinformation widely as though it were fact, especially when it creates potential harm? Brandy, why don't you?
Yes, yes. Only because what is the government going to deem mis and at one point, you know, the lab leak theory was mis and disinformation until, you know, the Democrats decided it wasn't, then it was totally acceptable. You know, issues about the vaccine were mis and disinformation, the Hunter Biden laptop story. So if you're going to punish someone and then 2 years later, all of a sudden that conspiracy is true, and now it's on the front page of the New York Times, then you've really put yourself in a pickle, haven't you?
Yeah.
So absolutely, it has to be legal.
And let me, before I go to you, Nadine, let's remember that Joe Biden actually tried to put into place something that he called the Disinformation Governance Board. How do you feel, I mean, riffing off of this question and thinking about it in terms of Trump, these categories of dis and mis and sometimes malinformation
inherently subjective, inherently subject to manipulation by whoever is enforcing it. And so, yes, this mis or disinformation can cause a lot of harm, but much less harm than empowering any government official, whether under the Biden administration or the Trump administration or even the Nick Gillespie administration, to make those inherently subjective
You'll be looking
decisions.
back at Trump and saying, it wasn't so bad.
And if I could say to Anonymous, very popular name in Seattle apparently, if I could say to Anonymous, if we agree, and we didn't agree on a lot today, this is happening right now in the state of Washington. There were efforts over the last 2 years to criminalize wrong speech on elections. They just passed a law that will ban public health level disagreement and forced distribution of vaccine propaganda for local health departments. Look it up, it's a law. So, and Jay Inslee wanted to criminalize wrong speech during the pandemic.
Yeah, very quickly on that kind of topic, is part of the problem, Nadine, and you said at the beginning that, you know, Trump is taking things further, like he's qualitatively different, but in many ways he's using the structures that were put in place by prior administrations, Republican or Democrat. Is the idea that we get to that neutrality standard so that no government can start talking about mis or disinformation?
I think that's exactly right, and that's why organizations like the ACLU and others are constantly defending the underlying principle of free speech, even for the speech that we hate, to quote the United States Supreme Court, because those procedures are necessary to protect freedom for the speech that we love.
Nadine just triggered me with ACLU.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm so triggered.
Are you going to sue her now for
I think I'm going to sue her.
or-
No.
Okay.
The ACLU, I'm sorry, I know you're like the OG of the ACLU. The ACLU has lost its mind. It only protects speech from the left. We had an example of that in Seattle this past week where a peaceful Christian rally was interrupted by violent Antifa activists. And they pushed out, I mean, that's just the truth. I was there.
Okay.
So, and their statement was anti-LGBTQ. They only defend speech from the left.
Okay, so do you consider the NRA, the National Rifle Association, the left? The ACLU
when did they
defended
nationally
the NRA in the Supreme Court last year
Okay, all right,
and
that's a good
won
example.
a victory 9-0.
Maybe
Okay,
maybe the ACLU Washington is a little different.
Well, let's
okay.
move to a new question. Thank you. A new question, yet again from Anonymous. For Brandy, we'll start with Brandy then. Customs and Border Protection is searching personal devices for views on the current administration. How could you see this as good?
Is that true?
You tell me.
I don't know if it's
Well,
true that the Trump administration.
Hypothetically,
Yeah.
if they
Are we
did
going
it.
to assume it's true?
Yeah.
I don't know what the legality is. Have they gotten a search
Should-
warrant for it? So I believe,
Yeah.
first and foremost, let's set this straight, that even if you're in the country illegally, that you have a right to due process, and you are protected by our Constitution.
Right.
So I do believe that, because you're subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and so I know that my side tends to disagree, but I do
Right.
believe you have the same constitutional rights as
Do you
everyone
feel
else.
that way? I mean, there have been at least a couple of college students who are not citizens who have gotten into trouble for either speaking at rallies or publishing opinion pieces critical of the, not even necessarily of the American government, but of the Israeli government. Do you think that's...
So to me, I can't give a broad answer because it's a case-by-case basis. So for me, if there's a student code of conduct. So if you're a student and you violate that code of conduct in some way, if you're a foreign student, well, you're out of school, so your student visa is null and void, you're going to go back home. The punishment for an American is they just get kicked out of school. Is that fair? I don't know. But on a case-by-case basis, I agree with some of the decisions to revoke student visas, specifically when they're creating hostile environments on campus for groups like Jewish students.
But it sounds like
just for speech, just for speech, our college campuses are rooted in free speech movements. And I don't want to see that change, as vile as the speech may be.
Great.
Do you have a strong opinion on the scanning of social media apps as people are coming into the country or things like that?
Well, I think that unfortunately, as a legal matter, the Supreme Court has held that until you enter the country, you don't have constitutional rights. I bristle at that, but that's what the current law is. There is a strong connection to free speech because you will be, again, deterred from expressing yourself freely if you know that it's going to be subject to government surveillance. And here in Washington State, I think of that great civil libertarian, one of the greatest on the Supreme Court, William O. Douglas, who said very famously that privacy is the ultimate bedrock for other freedoms, including First Amendment freedoms.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't understand the question. You're saying, so anonymous, as they come in, it's kind of fair game. You're asking to come into the country.
Right.
I got searched at the Canadian border once, and they looked through a box of my feminine hygiene products. So, I don't know.
Maybe you were bringing maple syrup.
Yes, I don't know specifically what, if somebody says something bad about Trump, they're booted. I haven't heard any examples of that, but.
Okay. We have talked about Donald Trump, Congress, lawmakers, and the media. What is the larger effect of Trump, talking the way he is? What is the responsibility of individual citizens to kind of make free speech freer or more of a reality?
Oh, gosh. I honestly, I think this is the right crowd. You're here because you care about these issues. I think you're here because you're intellectuals. And the thing I've always preached is that moral consistency and is independent thought. And I'm very worried that we're getting away from the ability to really take off our political goggles and look at something on the merits and decide whether you agree with the behavior, whether you agree with the policy. And it's like, if my side did it, great. If the other side did it, horrible. I'm going to be unhinged about it.
Okay.
And I think that's the biggest danger happening in the country.
Nadine, what do you
Early
think?
in the 20th century, one of the first scholars to study free speech and a founder of the ACLU, Zechariah Chafee, said something that I think is still true today, more than 100 years later. He said, in the long run, people will have just as much freedom of speech as they want. If we, the people, do not constantly demand free speech and exercise it and demand it of no matter who is in power, no matter who is wielding social pressure or peer pressure, we're not going to have it. So thank you for demanding it.
I want to thank Brandy Cruz, Nadine Strawson. Thank you all in the audience, and for those of you watching at home or listening to this podcast, for being part of this important conversation and for taking part in the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival.